Hello, I'm Casey Aiken, and this is 21 This Week. Coming up next, Governor Hogan opens COVID vaccination sites to all Marylanders 16 and older. Sine Die is approaching. What bills will receive final passage? County Council requires landlords to install window guards in all multifamily dwelling units. And Max Scherzer wants more fans. Our panel of insiders will give you the story behind the story. We're joined by the Secretary of the Maryland Republican Central Committee, Marc Uncapher, and former County Council member, Mike Knapp. Stay tuned for these stories and more on the next 21 This Week. After weeks and months of dealing with the COVID-19 pandemic, it now appears that the return to normalcy may be in sight. This week, Governor Hogan announced that all Marylanders over the age of 16 are eligible for the COVID vaccination, and that 75% of all Maryland seniors have received at least one vaccination shot. Mike, the announcement that younger people are eligible for the vaccine came about 2 weeks earlier than expected. Why is that?
Well, I hope it's because we're actually making progress and we have access to more supply than we've had previously. The cynic in me says we just want to say we got to that number sooner, and we say we've opened the door to more people. It's not clear to me yet when I look at who's getting signed up for vaccinations that we're actually increasing the number of people getting vaccinated or the speed with which we're getting vaccinated. We just have access to more people. So I'm curious to see. For example, I know they just opened the mass vaccination site in Germantown today at the Montgomery College campus. But I've not heard anybody actually say that there's more vaccine. It's just another place to go.
So, well, but it would also maybe an indication that people have not been filling up the slots, and so why not open it up to a larger pool of candidates who can take advantage of it?
And I hope that's the case. As one who's signed up on both the county and the state's pre-registration site as both in a critical class for working and in the right age group, I've yet to be notified from that perspective. I managed to find a way to get a vaccine through one of the local pharmacies, which hopefully will happen this weekend. But so it's interesting because I know we've opened up to more people, but I've not necessarily seen those floodgates opening with more people getting access to those vaccines.
Wow. I know all of this is anecdotal, but the people that I know that are younger than my age group have all been able to get a vaccination appointment scheduled for themselves. So yeah, I hope people are taking advantage of it. So Marc, Mike kind of stole the thunder there because Governor Hogan has been under criticism for the rollout of the vaccination program, but his defense has always been a lack of supply from the federal government. Have all those issues been resolved?
Well, I think we've made a lot of progress on it. I think the news yesterday was that in Maryland, we did 76,000 vaccinations. That's what the governor announced. And so far, we've hit 3.2 million in the state. So 78% of the people over 65 have been vaccinated. And as you've already said, it's been open to a larger pool. Listen, as that happens, as more people get vaccinated, precisely what we should expect is that more and more people who want to and are able to get to a place are being vaccinated.
Look, I think we ought to be thrilled that over 3 million people have been vaccinated. We have a population of just under 7 million. So I think that if half the adults have already been, or more than half the adults have already been vaccinated, that is excellent news. We should be happy about that.
No, and I agree, and I wouldn't necessarily be negative. I'm not trying to be negative. I recognize it completely as a supply issue, and you're taking something that no one was manufacturing before and is trying to increase that access. And as we get more and more supply, more and more people hopefully are taking advantage of and getting vaccinated. And so I think what we've seen has not necessarily been a bad situation with rollout per se. It's just been people's expectations and limited supply.
One of the things that caught my eye the other day was an article by the personal finance website Wallet Hub, which issued a report that concluded the Maryland economy has weathered the pandemic better than all but 6 other states. Mike, does that come as a shock? I mean, from what I can tell from many small business owners, they haven't weathered it very well.
No, I think it's one of the unique characteristics that is Maryland. I think obviously those small businesses, the hospitality businesses, have really struggled. And I think that, you know, in the retail shops, I think also though, because we have so many businesses that are supporting the federal government, that are, you know, supporting industries, not necessarily just in Maryland, that we have been able to weather it at that level. But I don't think in any way should people say, oh, that's great, we've all done okay. Because I think if anything, we look and recognize that the economic disparities, those industries that were hit hard were decimated. And so if you've been fortunate, you know, that's great, but don't take that as a notion that everybody's doing fine, because everybody's not doing fine.
Yeah, yeah. So Marc, you know, talking about the divergence between private sector jobs and public sector jobs, I mean, we seem very reliant on federal government employment. Is that, you know, the solution to all of the state's problems?
We're reliant on federal government employment, although actually it's the contractor community. Actually, employment has been relatively stable over the last couple of decades. What's really grown dramatically is the contractor community, and the significance of that is that it's potentially far more mobile. Those jobs are much more, you know, they have to compete for those contracts. If they can get a better cost structure, they can work remotely. That's what's going to happen. And I think that's going to be a long-term vulnerability that the Washington area is going to have to face, and Maryland in particular.
Well, I'll note as we go on to our next topic that the county council here in Montgomery County just allocated $1.5 million for small businesses, for additional small business relief. I mean, they've been trying to provide as much as they could during this past year. So I want to go on to talk about the General Assembly, because the annual session of the General Assembly is fast coming to an end on Sine Die next Tuesday. Marc, the majority of changes have been focused on police training and discipline, and 2 of the more controversial aspects were access to police disciplinary records and the fear of uncorroborated complaints being lodged against police officers. You know, there's talk that Governor Hogan may veto some parts of what's called the police reform package.
Well, by way of explanation, it's probably worth explaining that there was a very much bipartisan reform proposal that was originally passed by the Senate, and a more controversial proposal that went through the House. And it appears that the House seems to have dominated in this. There were a number of proposals for reform that, frankly, a lot of people could have gotten around that would have been that would have enjoyed strong support. As you've said, the more controversial provisions in the House really, I think, will diminish the ability of police to fight crime and discourage many officers from being as effective as they could be. And that really is not what folks want.
Yeah, Mike, the repeal of the Police Officers' Bill of Rights was highly contentious, as Marc just pointed out. And here in Montgomery County yesterday, the union, which represents Montgomery County police officers, criticized the anti-cop attitude that elected officials now have. Now, are we going to see a reverse effect that the reforms that are being enacted are going to make the communities less safe than more safe?
Well, I mean, I think this is a very challenging conversation. I think first and foremost, one of the things you always have to remember and say, we need to say out loud, is that Montgomery County is an amazingly safe community. Our rate of crime here is amazingly low. That doesn't mean that there aren't periods and there aren't places where we've seen some, but I think that's an important piece for people to remember. The other thing is that I think there has been this tendency of a piling on effect, because we've seen situations and issues where there have been other places. And so we've seen a piling on from elected officials on kind of being against police. when the reality is, I think we obviously need police. Police can provide a vital function. But I think there's also a recognition that there needs to be some increased transparency as to how that is governed, how that's administered. And I think the unions have worked hard to always, obviously, because that's their job and their role is to defend the rights of police. And I think you've got the rest of society saying, well, that's great, but what about us and where do we fit in that? There's a middle ground there to be taken, I think, as it looks at police training, what are expectations of police, and having a different conversation. But of course, it's either you're for or you're against. And the reality is that we've got to get to some place in the middle to make sure that police can do the effective job we want them to do and are trained to do so.
Well, it also seems that this, some of the reforms that were being called for were a Baltimore problem and not a statewide problem, because police forces in Montgomery County have been improved and well trained for a long period of time. We'll have to wait and see what the governor does. What governor does with this. Marc, one of the other topics that the General Assembly took up was sports betting. Another bad idea, like the forbidden fruit, that is irresistible to the insatiable government appetite that we seem to have. So what is that all about, and what's going to happen?
Well, forgive me, but this is a lobbyist dream. The legislature set the price for the license and in the quote free market solution, and I think you can just about guarantee that the price that was set was well below what the economic value is to the various entities that are being given to this. This is a giveaway. It's very targeted as to which entities are able to do it, although there's sort of a lesser group of licenses that are opened up for auction, or not auction, but can be purchased. The primary beneficiaries are the existing gambling institution and sports teams. It's a bad idea, and we'll see what happens and how much revenue it really produces.
I got to say, I was really shocked that there was less opposition to this bill than was manifested. I mean, we all recall when we first went to Lotto, and then we went to slot machines, and then we went to insight gambling. I mean, there seemed to be much more opposition to it. I'm always amused when I listen to a radio ad that talks about online sports gambling, and then half the ad is devoted to if you have a gambling problem. I mean, I just think that as a society we're ignoring some of the dangers that are lurking out there.
And I was surprised that the professional sports teams were sort of teed up for this licenses. Historically, they have been very reluctant to see gambling on their sports for fear of the corruption and the potential corrosive effects that it would have. So there seems to be a reversal there. Well,
I mean, I think until there's a scandal, it'll be glossed over, right? Because a lot of the sports betting parlors are going to be inside stadiums.
Right, exactly.
Where the stadium owner is going to make a lot of money. Mike, before we go on our break, the legislature dumped Maryland, My Maryland is the state song effective July 1st. What should its replacement be? I left my wallet in Annapolis.
Yeah, I mean, it's always an interesting year. I guess one of the things that I'm struck by is, and I think Maryland's doing better. I'll be curious to see how the county does it. I think because of the resources that the state and local jurisdictions have received from the federal government, it's going to allow a glossing over of some poor decisions that were made during the challenging time. To your point earlier, the economics, I think, in Montgomery County and the state showed that collectively we actually did not as bad as people were anticipating. But I think there was a lot of talking about gambling. There was a lot of gambling done with our budgetary dollars in hopes that something would show up on the other side from the federal government. And I think some poor decisions were made. And I think rather than dealing with those poor structural decisions in our budgets, now we're going to have some resources coming from the feds that are going to allow us to continue to spend money in places we shouldn't and not necessarily rethink our priorities. And so I think that's one of the biggest challenges that we're going to see going forward is how do our budgets actually really come to fruition when we've kind of masked the challenges that are in them?
And next year will be an election year, so we're probably not going to see very many changes at that time. Is there anything else we need to consider on the legislative front before we go to break? Anybody have any hot button legislative ideas? Hearing none, when we come back from this short break, County Council passed the Child Safety Act, and Mad Max Scherzer wants more fans in the stands. Stay tuned. Welcome back. This week, the Montgomery County Council approved a bill to enhance housing safety for tenants and families by requiring window guards be installed in multifamily dwellings. Now, Mike, this bill was enacted quickly after the death of a 2-year-old boy last October. Yet these types of accidents are fairly rare across the country at large. And I'm always concerned that the bars on the windows, besides looking terrible and making you feel like you're in a prison cell, create a hazard, a fire hazard, which occurs much more often than the accident that it's designed to prevent.
No, I agree. I think the challenge is, that it was tragic when the 2-year-old fell to their death. It's a horrible situation for the family, and I think it certainly brings attention to that. But I struggle when any legislative body, in particular our local county council, rushes so quickly to kind of enact something to address right or wrong that I'm not necessarily sure is a wrong in the first place. It's a very tragic situation. And so I didn't follow all of the specifics of this, but I didn't see any indication that there was all of a sudden this was a huge issue that needed to be addressed. It was, again, a single tragic incident. And so I just think a lot of times legislative bodies need to take a step back and go, where are we really and where do we need to be? Because oftentimes the cure is worse than the disease. And I think this may be another situation for that. Again, not in any way demeaning the tragedy that the family withstood and the challenges that are there. But I struggle to see what bigger problem we're trying to solve.
Well, again, I'm really concerned about the safety aspect from a fire perspective. And when you look at the types of window guards that may be required, they're all permanent fixtures. And if you're on a third floor apartment, are you going to be prevented from escaping? I just wonder if that was,
There's a higher law. There's a higher law in legislation, which is the law of unintended consequences, and that's really where you want to look to, sort of the institutes of safety.
The aesthetics aside, I feel like you're going to drive by these apartments, and they're all going to look like they belong on The Wire, the Baltimore cop show. Anyway, Marc, I wanted to talk to you about baseball because it is baseball season. And even though it's no longer the national pastime because of the All-Star game has caused such controversy, today is opening day at Camden Yards. And 11,000 fans will be in attendance. 2 days ago, on Tuesday, when the Nationals held its opening game, talk about being tongue-tied, there were only 5,000 in attendance in a stadium that holds 42,000 people. When are local officials going to allow more fans to attend outdoor sporting events?
Well, it's hard to say when local officials. Of course, I think down in Texas they're getting much more of a turnout. But you touched on one of the points I want to make is now that baseball's decided, Major League Baseball wants to be a blue country sport. I'm taking a new interest. I've never done it before in NASCAR, and it turns out that there's a NASCAR race down in Virginia this weekend, and maybe I should take a look at that as opposed to paying attention to what goes on with the Nationals or at Camden Yard.
Well, down in Bristol, Tennessee, 2 weeks ago, they had a NASCAR race back on dirt.
Back to the roots.
They went back to the roots. So, Marc, maybe you're ahead of the times.
There you go.
That being said, I don't necessarily think that it's a bad thing for our corporate entities to begin to weigh in. I was intrigued with the Republican leader in the U.S. Senate indicated that he didn't think that businesses should play a role in politics, when it seems to me that politics is actually how we make sure that everybody in society can get where they need to get to. And so I was intrigued by that. And I'm waiting to see if he's actually going to start giving any of those dollars back to those businesses he didn't think should be involved in politics.
I think he precisely said that it was the comments that were being made by the business didn't reflect the substance of the law. Many of these provisions clarified in Georgia, existing provisions in Georgia, or provisions that are common in other states as well. So I think his comment was that it was based on a false premise.
Well, I know you guys immediately want to go for the political angle.
I'm going to NASCAR.
I want to express the local public outrage about not being able to go to a baseball game when it's clearly there's lots of ways to segregate and be separated. I went to church, for goodness sake, on Easter Sunday, and every other aisle was blocked off. I mean, and that was indoors. I mean, why couldn't we do the same thing in a baseball field? I mean, the politicians just seem to lack common sense at times. And of course, I have a vested interest here. I have a wedding that I want held on August 28th, and the damn politicians aren't moving fast enough.
Well, I got to say, I continue to be astounded with how we've managed to make this worldwide pandemic a political issue in the United States, and that you're on somehow, if you're for certain things, or if you're for masks, you're on one side. If you're against masks, you're on the other side. If you're for vaccines, if you're for people getting together, you're on one side. Like, folks, this is a collective issue. I mean, this is something we all collectively have to work to resolve, and the sooner we all collectively work to resolve it, more closely we can get back to what we think normalcy looks like.
Well, I'm anxious to see whether the 45,000 fans that attended opening day at Arlington Stadium for the Texas Ranger game will be a super spreader event, so we can have some evidence that I can have 150 people at a wedding that can eat, drink, and dance to music. That's what I'm looking forward to. When we come back from the short break, parting shots. Now with parting shots, Marc Uncapher.
So thank you, Casey. And I'd like to give a big boo or thumbs down to Congressman Anthony Brown, who sent a letter to the U.S. Department of Transportation opposing the plan, getting them to weigh in on the plan to address gridlock on the Capitol Beltway and the American Legion Bridge. This is a plan that's gotten a lot of support here in Maryland. And it really is unfortunate that the congressman should try and block what is a good solution. It's particularly galling that he complains about the lack of, quote, mass transit solutions, given the fact that we're also in the process of building the Purple Line.
Thank you, Marc. Mike Knapp, your parting shot.
Thank you, Casey. I just want to give a shout out to all of our students and young adults. 20,000 students went back to school in Montgomery County today. And I think the last 14 months have been amazingly challenging for those students and for our 18 to 24-year-olds who are oftentimes, you're at that point in your life, you're experiencing those once in a lifetime events. And there's a whole lot of them who won't get to experience those things. And we know we've seen real challenges in mental health issues, increase in mental health issues in those populations. And I just want to give a shout out to them because they're weathering the storm. It's been a tough, long slog. And I hope that we continue to focus on how we provide mental health services and help them get back to a sense of normalcy, because I think that's going to be critically important for that generation.
You know, Mike, I think you're so accurate and correct that getting back to a routine for students and getting schools reestablished on a full-time basis is really, really important. I want to thank Marc and Mike for being here today. I want to thank the audience for tuning in each and every week to Montgomery County's hardest-hitting political talk show. For 21 this week, I'm Casey Aiken.